Okay. Do you have any thoughts or opinions about MSure? MNsure?
Minnesota Sure,
Yes.
Minsure they call it.
Are you? Yes. Are you, your company slash business, or anyone you know going to be directly affected by the new form of healthcare? If so, how will they be affected?
So yes, I do have an opinion about it, but my opinion is mixed. So I think there are pros and cons to everything. The pros to Minsure, if it functions properly, is that you'll find a bunch of people that are insured that would be otherwise uninsured. So from that perspective, it's a good thing. It's not very unlike any of the other social programs that are out there. So it's an asset in that sense. It's an asset in the sense that there will be a whole bunch of people that need coverage that get it. The liability is that I think the cost model is kind of messed up. So with the cost model set up, it gets spread out, and some people might say that it's unequally distributed, the cost model, so that people that really have no connection to it are still going to end up paying for it. So that's what I think the liability is. What's the effect to North Central? Negligible, I think. Our HR department came out with some statement that said something that was very amorphous and kind of quiet, and I haven't heard anything since. So I'm assuming that if there's any real effect to us, we'll hear about it. But so far, I haven't heard much of anything at all.
Cool, cool. What are your thoughts or opinions about the new Viking Stadium that is currently under construction and the new plans for the area surrounding the stadium? Will the new construction have any effect on you, your place of work, or your business?
So I'm a Vikings fan, so I have a little bit of a skewed opinion. I think it's a ludicrous amount of money to spend on a public stadium. And I think that the ownership group should have put more money in than they did. So I don't think that to me, it doesn't feel like a fair distribution of cost. I think that the public's paying too much and the people who are going to make the money off of it are paying too little. That's my personal opinion. Will it have any effect on us? It's going to have an enormous effect on North Central because it's going to affect our property values, which can go a couple of different ways. It can be an asset because our property values will increase, therefore we'll have more asset on the balance sheet. But our property taxes will increase as our property values increase. Therefore, North Central will probably end up paying greater property tax once the nonprofit. I think we have the nonprofit. What's the word I'm looking for? Determination. There's going to come a day in the near future when Christian nonprofits aren't going to be protected under the nonprofit rule. There's already a groundswell of drama about that, and it's only a matter of time till churches and everybody loses their nonprofit status. So when that time comes, then North Central is going to start getting these really big bills, quarterly or annually, that they're going to have to pay, and that could be a problem. I like the development around the stadium better than the stadium itself. I think it's smart, and I think every city, every major metro area is going to have to try to figure out how to revitalize their downtown inner city corridor. I think this is the start of that for Minneapolis. So I like it. I'm pro. So I'm probably more anti-stadium than pro. I'm much more pro-neighborhood development than anti. And I think North Central better pay attention or we could be in some really big trouble in just a short amount of time here.
Makes sense. What are your thoughts about the transit system throughout the Twin Cities and metro area? Do you think it's worth investing to continue the expansion of the metro lines?
Right before I accepted my position here, I wrote a successful grant for $150,000 for transit. I'm very deeply embedded in this conversation, I guess you could say. Am I pro or con? That's an interesting thought. I think I'm pro, but let me put a caveat on that. So I think public transportation is a good thing. I think that the best public transportation, if it fails to reach the residents that need it the most, is fail. So, for example, this Southwest Corridor line that everybody's up in arms about right now, if all it does is, bypass poor neighborhoods and go out to the wealthy, and the wealthy can come in and out of downtown, and it never really touches anybody of a lower income bracket, then I think it has failed. So, but I also think that it's good for our region. All of the regional studies say that if the Twin Cities Metro is going to recruit and retain talent, we've got to have an updated transportation system. Because there are other places like Portland and Seattle that are stealing all of our best people because they've got a lot more infrastructure when it comes to that sort of stuff. So it's almost like a necessary evil in some ways. The upside of it is it's going to be helpful to people who don't have transportation who really, really need it. So I think I'm more pro than con on that one.
Right. I feel probably about the same way. A lot of these, like, I already know kind of like the general answers because we talk about them in our classes.
Right,
So I'm
right.
like, oh, I kind of know what's up. What are your thoughts on the public school system in the metro area? Do you think it has been effective in fostering a safe and enriching learning environment?
Hmm. Well, those are two separate questions. My general thought about the public schools is that they're not doing very well, but in some ways it's not their fault. Public education is funded by property taxes, property values, and Minneapolis, especially certain parts of Minneapolis, already had a problem with that. You know, you go out to Wayzata, and the average property value is probably somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 average, maybe higher. So there's a lot of extra revenue to fund all kinds of stuff, which is why you have these amazing football fields and all that stuff. The city doesn't have the same luxury. I mean, that being said, there are some things that have happened to Minneapolis public that have nothing to do with finance that are, I think, just awful. So, like, for example, the NAACP sued the district twice, won both times. When the NAACP sued the district that was serving the most kids of color in the state of Minnesota, all these rules and regulations and restrictions came onto Minneapolis public, which squeezed it even further. Part of what happened was a lot of kids, their parents left Minneapolis public and enrolled them in suburban schools. Because one of the outcomes that was in the lawsuit was you have to give students the right to choose to go outside of their, neighborhood school or whatever. So Minneapolis public, I think, has done a decent job with, in my opinion, very limited resources. It's way different to teach at a school where there's maybe 3 languages than one where there's 36 languages, which some Minneapolis public schools have 36 languages. So I think they've done a decent job on the education side. On the safety side, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that question. I don't think what is safety? You could say that Minneapolis public schools or St. Paul public schools feel less safe because there's physical violence going on between students. But you could also say that there are dozens of unreported rapes out in other communities that are related to the school as well. So, hazing, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on. I think public education in America, whether inner city or suburban or whatever, I think it's all kind of a hot mess right now. I think the system needs to be reinvented from the ground up. I think the federal state war over education is stupid. And I think at the end of the day, kids are losing. And I think it sucks.
That's a bummer. Final question. What are your thoughts about crime prevention, and the effectiveness of the Minneapolis Police Department? Is this a safe city? Are there certain areas that bring up safety concerns in particular?
Generally speaking, this is a very safe city. I think you could look at certain neighborhoods and say that there are spikes. I mean, this is true of every major metro area across our nation. You can have any city that's, say 250,000 or more, and you'll have really, really fantastic neighborhoods, and then some neighborhoods that are adjacent to that where the crime rate is out of control. We know right now that in Minneapolis there are certain chunks that are problematic. North Minneapolis has been a problematic part for quite some time. But it's not all of North Minneapolis. It's really kind of like an 8 square block chunk of North Minneapolis that, 75% of the violent crimes happen in or whatever. It's gang related. But the same is becoming more and more true now of the suburbs. So you're seeing crime spike in Brooklyn Park, Richfield, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Maplewood, all of Eagan. All of these communities are now battling crime in ways that they haven't battled crime before. And it's not necessarily correlated with people of color or poverty. It's just crime. So I think Minneapolis Public does a good job most of the time. They've done a very good job, actually, of hiring a bunch of officers of color, which by itself transforms the whole, shop. But I think anytime you've got high density and a big population, you're going to run into trouble because people are people and they're just crashing into each other.